everybody. Thanks for joining us again today and for staying tuned for our last presentation of the day with Cisa DHS. We have our fabulous speaker, Dave Sonheim. He is the cybersecurity advisor for Cisa, which is the cybersecurity infrastructure agency, security agency. You probably have heard about them, but he's here to give you a presentation kind of on what they do, latest threats and everything like that. So Dave, I will let you take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Megan. I really appreciate it, and thanks for having me. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for taking the time to attend today's session, and hopefully you get a lot out of it. So as you mentioned, I'm from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, Department of Homeland Security. So as most of you may be aware, the Cybersecurity Act of 2018 was signed into law and not only renamed the National Protection Programs Directorate, which people weren't sure what that did, but actually within DHS actually named and appointed what we call the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Now, part of that legislation also elevates the mission and authority of CISA to serve as the National Critical Infrastructure Advisor. And so a big part of CISA's mission and goals, as you can kind of see there, we have a little catchphrase, defend today and secure tomorrow. And that's really just more than a catchphrase. It's really about providing and getting in that preparedness phase today, meaning falling into these no-cost preparedness activities and resources, which we're here today to kind of make sure you're aware of and make sure you take advantage of. And that's really to, make us be ready for any of those adversarial threats that come after our networks. And really, we can do a lot of that work during these preparedness activities, which the resources I'll share with you today kind of get after. So we're going to move to the next slide. Okay, so as we talked about, my name is Dave Sonam. I'm with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And as you can see on the slide, I'm out in Colorado at the Denver Fed Center. Obviously, I'm within the Region 8, and I'm one of the field staff out there in Region 8. I cover Colorado, South Dakota, and North Dakota, and my contact information is there. And as you can see, when we're done with the slides, we'll make sure you share that, and we'll get you the contact information. Okay, so as part of CISA's initiatives, you can kind of see the large areas that CISA is responsible for. And these kind of break down into cyber protection, infrastructure resilience, which is really trying to help our critical infrastructure owners and operators help secure their environments, emergency communications during times of disaster, and then we also have a new National Risk Management Center. And all of this kind of comes up to those 16 critical infrastructures. At the end of the day, we really kind of call it 16 plus 1, which is really adding the elections infrastructure. Secretary Nielsen added that as designated critical infrastructure as well. And PPD 41, Presidential Directive 41, really names CISA as that lead agency, and specifically for asset response. And that's part of the National Incident Response Plan, the National Cyber Incident Response Plan. And it actually named Department of Justice as the lead for the threat response. Okay, what we're after here is to kind of give you an overview of the CISA.gov site. There's lots of resources within the CISA.gov site. So some people may be more familiar with US CERT or ICS CERT. And really that's all rolled up underneath CISA.gov right now. And so you can kind of see some big banners there. I give you the link below for some of the resources that we'll talk about today. And obviously we'll be hitting that area underneath cybersecurity. Real quick, you can also notice that up at the top, there's a red and amber button. And those are both for you to be able to report any cyber or cyber malicious activity that's going on straight into CISA and what we now call CISA Central. Okay, once we go into that cybersecurity tab, what we'll see now is what we call the National Cyber Awareness System. And so the National Cyber Awareness System is part of CISA's initiative to really do that subscription, mailing, and make sure people are aware of the current advisories that are out there. So you can kind of see below the blocking and tackling we have there. We have any current cyber activity, the current published alerts, which I'll go into a little deeper so we understand what those terms mean. And then also any current bulletins we have, as well as some analysis reports. And I give you that link right in the middle of the page to exactly how to get at this National Cyber Awareness System. And as you can see, I still got some of the legacy US CERT verbiage in it in the URL. I've also highlighted on there and circled some of the resources, which we're obviously going to talk about today. Okay, so as promised, when we get in here and start looking at these alerts, sometimes it's a little confusing to understand the terminology or what these terms mean when I see the alert. So as you can see, and we're going to pull them up at the end and give you a listing of these activity alerts. And routinely, CISA, as well as some joint agencies, will publish some of these activity alerts. And those will always be identified with the AA identification, and usually be followed by the year that it happened within, and then a sequence number so you can reference them. We also have analysis reports, which obviously is the AR terminology. Some of the reports will also fall into two different categories, which we call a MAR and a MILFAR, meaning that it's a malware analysis report, which is actually the findings, the completed document. And then when we initially get it, that's why we use that malware initial findings report terminology to tell you that it's not been fully vetted and it's just the initial report. You also see SBs on there with the same numbering scheme, and those are the security bulletins. And those are really kind of the weekly roll-up. So if you don't have time to chase the individual alerts on a daily basis or the when they come out, look for that weekly roll-up. And all of these you can subscribe to. Additionally, as part of the Department of Homeland Security, separate from CISA, is our Intelligence and Analysis Division. And they will actually produce what they call the IIBs, or the Intelligence Information Briefs, which also highlight some of this activity. Now, as part of that legacy US CERT and ICS CERT, which is all kind of together now under CISA Central, we'll still have that industrial control system specific advisories or alerts. And so you'll see in there, those will be labeled ICS alert. And you can obviously go on the website and apply for those and get those ICS alerts directly to your inbox. But same kind of numbering format with the year and the number. You also see the ICS CERT advisories, same kind of format there for the tracking. You also see any kind of reports that they're doing, which is typically a fiscal year or roll up for the year that they've seen across all the industrial control systems. And then they'll also have a tips or an ICS tip, which is some of the security tips or best practice guides that they're putting out there to try to assist owners and operators securing their environments. Some other terms you may hear that come out from other federal agencies, such as the FBI, they'll use the terminology of PIN, which is a public information notice. Sometimes the FBI, as well as NSA and Cyber Command and Department of Justice, will issue a joint alert, and some of those are done through the flash alerts. So hopefully that gives you a good rundown and kind of demystifies how those things are labeled. Okay, back to my specific role. Obviously, as a cybersecurity advisor, the idea there is to establish those relationships with those essential stakeholders, whether that's critical infrastructure or state and local government, and really assist in that preparedness activity. We also conduct assessments. We do briefings and outreach items just like this. So hopefully you have a background and familiar with it. The next slide, we're going to show you where those are located nationwide. We're actually growing the program. We're trying to improve it. And we'll actually give you the address, the email address you can hit if you're looking for your local cybersecurity advisor. But the thing to know is they're in your backyard and they're local. Okay, so as promised, here's the current layout. And you can see myself and Rick Gardner cover Region 8. Mr. Reinderson is kind of the supervisor over the region as well as some other regions. But you can kind of see the footprint. Okay, this kind of breaks it down for you to try to help you understand what does my CSA do, my local CSA do, versus what does headquarters or the technical scanning team do. And this kind of helps break it down for you. So just as I highlighted a little while ago, the CSA services that we directly deliver kind of fall in that top part. You know, that can be anything from exercise and playbooks, that can be information sharing, and then specifically, which we'll cover today, are some of the assessments that we facilitate in order to help those owners and operators gain awareness of their network. And we'll talk about those in more detail. Down below that, you'll see the ones that are delivered by our headquarters elements, which, you know, this used to be called the NCATS team, and now we actually call them the vulnerability management team. And you can see, and these are kind of the technical assessments, anything from vulnerability scanning to penetration testing, anything along those lines. On the right side of the slide, you can kind of see how we break that down. The headquarters element kind of falls within one element on the technical team. And then both the cybersecurity advisors and protective security advisors are out in the field. There are the field forces that are out in the regions out there to assist owners and operators. Okay, this one is kind of our roll-up, and we do this kind of in a menu service offering, so it's kind of easy to understand. And like I said, we're going to get you a copy of the slides, but this just gives you the highlight across the ones. And remember, these are the ones that the CSA directly delivers, and we're going to talk a little bit more about these in detail. But this is kind of how we formulated in kind of a menu service offering. It highlights the time typically it takes to coordinate, and that's based on the cybersecurity advisor, your local cybersecurity advisor's calendar schedule, what else he has on his plate. But it kind of gives you an idea of who should be involved, who should be part of it, all those kinds of things. And then at the bottom there in the blue letters, the hyperlink is actually that email address. So if you're trying to get in contact with your local CSA, your local cybersecurity advisor from Cisa, just hit that email address and they will connect you with your local contact. Okay, so this is the first one that was on the previous slide, and we call this one our Cyber Resilience Review. Those of you that may or may not be familiar, this one's based on the Carnegie Mellon body of knowledge, which we call the CERT RMM. And the CERT RMM is really designed to help agencies build cyber resiliency. It's a well-done assessment. It's kind of a question and answer type assessment. And we're going to show you the domains that we hit in here. And really, the CSA facilitates this. And the biggest benefit that I can tell you from doing it for a while is, you know, getting people who work together all the time but don't necessarily talk to each other every day. And that's really where the benefit comes out, is that's where those conversations come. That's where you start to understand what practices are really being done and not being done, and help them just gain a better awareness of what cybersecurity practices are in place today. This one highlights the 10 domains, the 10 areas we focus on for the assessment. In a second, you'll kind of see how we score that and how it comes out. But you can kind of see these are the 10 fundamentals within any cybersecurity program. Part of what we do before we start the assessment is really kind of scope out what critical service we want to get after. We don't want to be too broad, or we don't want to be too negative, too narrow. We want it to be focused on what the agency feels is this is a critical system and this is critical for us doing our mission. And we kind of focus all of the questions around that. So as you can see, once we're done completing the assessment, we can actually map the CERT RMM body of knowledge back into the Nist cybersecurity framework. So a lot of agencies really like this. They have some compliancy requirements within Nist, and now we have Nist version 1.1, which includes some of those third-party external management type relationships, and that's why they really like this assessment. And so it kind of gives you a good snapshot as part of the overall report. It actually maps into Nist and says, how am I doing as an organization if I compare that self against the cybersecurity framework? Okay, and this gives you a good example of what's included in the report. Roughly 50 pages. It gives you some good trending on the left side, so you can see how you stand against other agencies. You know, the big dip there you see in kind of the analytics there is risk management. Typically, we see that as an area that cybersecurity professionals kind of expect somebody else in the organization to help them with that. And so that's kind of a driving theme that we've seen across them, is to try to get risk management activities included in cybersecurity activities. The middle part, kind of, we just talked about that one, which is the Nist cybersecurity framework mapping. And on the right side, you'll see kind of the deep dive. And so in each one of those domains, we're going to go specifically about all of the goals of each one of the practices, as well as what we'll talk about on the next slide, which is part of the maturity indicator levels that the assessment uses to kind of guide your path as you work through your cybersecurity program. Okay, this one is the external dependencies management assessment. So even though we talked a little bit about this during the CRR, the Cyber Resilience Review, we have a separate assessment. And this one is really focused on those external dependencies and those third-party risk management activities. And so that's really what the assessment focuses on. It's a breakout assessment specific to focus on that. So if that's a lot of activity that you're doing, or if you have a lot of supply chain issues and you just want to get some visibility from a risk perspective, how do we look as an organization when we enter these relationships? And so we look at this, we break it up into three kind of areas. You know, how is that relationship initially formed? Are we putting the right language in those terms and conditions of the contracts to ensure that we have the authority and the visibility of these vendors, and they're meeting some kind of criteria before we start allowing them access or have awareness of our environment? Next, after this, the relationship is formed, how well are we managing the activity? How much governance do we have over that, where we have visibility of exactly who's logging on? Not with a generic account, but we know exactly the individual. So we can ensure we can do some tracking on that access management. The last one gets into the service and protection and sustainment. Does that vendor understand how important it is for this service and how that service ties to my agency's mission to conduct our business? And so we really kind of get after all that. We use the same kind of question and answer type scale. And we also use the maturity indicator scale, which we talked about a little bit a second ago. And very similar on the report side. So we're going to break this across for you and give you your roll up. You're actually going to get to see how you scored against other agencies that have completed it. Very new that just came out is actually an ability to map this one into the Nist cybersecurity framework, which wasn't an ability before. And so that was just recently added. And so a lot of agencies really like to see that, especially with the version 1.1 that just came out, is some of that third-party risk and be able to map that into the Nist cybersecurity framework. Okay, the next assessment we'll talk about is really not necessarily quote an assessment. What we call this one is a survey. And so you can kind of see the 5 areas down below that we talked about this. And it usually takes about 2.5 to 4 hours. And what we're really doing here is not necessarily assessing, we're understanding how does your cybersecurity program work, right? How many folks do you have in IT? How many folks are dedicated to cyber? And how many of those folks are dedicated to cyber incident response? And what we're really trying to do is gather this data across these 5 areas: cybersecurity forces, cybersecurity controls, incident response, cybersecurity management, and dependencies, and take your information and build it into this tool. And the idea with the tool is to give you a dashboard look across these 5 domains of kind of where you're at in your process. So as you can kind of see, once we do the investigation over a couple hours and we make sure we understand exactly what's happening in the organization, the result that you get back as a stakeholder is a graphical view. And what we call this is our Cyber Protection Resilience Index. And so it kind of scores you on a scale based on the inventory that we did to see what's happening, what's not happening. You can kind of see the legend over there on the right. It scores it against the high performers that have done the assessment, some of the folks that probably need a little more work, and then the yellow is kind of the median average, and then the blue bars are actually where you came out on it. And so it kind of gives you an analysis of where you're at in projection. A lot of folks like to use this as part of their briefing. So if they're going to try to chase additional resources or try to work towards an initiative or maybe a 3 to 5 year plan, they kind of use this as the first step to gain an awareness or a benchmark of where they currently sit. This one here is the resource guides. So as we talked about in the CRR, the Cyber Resilience Review, we talked about those 10 domains. So a lot of stakeholders, when we come in and do the debrief, they say, wow, I was kind of surprised a little bit that maybe like the risk management domain or the controls domain, we didn't score quite as well as we thought. If we wanted to take that as an initiative, do you have a guide we could follow in order to maybe kind of move the needle or make that process? And so the answer to that obviously is yes. I give you the URL link above there. And what that URL link does is take you to this page. And this is where all these resource guides live. And so that's a relationship we have with Carnegie Mellon as part of that CERT RMM body of knowledge. And these guides are the detailed how to build your program based on these best practices. So obviously, a lot of that material will match, some of that material may not match your industry or your sector, but it gives you a good overview and a good resource guide. That way you have some good body of knowledge to follow as you start to put these programs or put these practices into place. Okay, we're going to move into some of the technical assessments that Cisa offers as well. So the ones we just covered, again, are delivered directly by your local cybersecurity advisor. And that's just a simple email to the cyber advisors or directly to the contact, and we can get you on our calendar to complete some of those assessments. What we're going to talk about now is more on our vulnerability management team. And this is our technical team at the Department of Homeland Security, CISA's Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency's technical assessments team. And this used to be called NCATS if some of you are familiar with that language. But the idea here is to better understand our risk posture. Obviously, we can kind of see the risk calculation scheme there, and we highlighted and read the vulnerability. And I think the part in that is helpful here is that once we start to understand the vulnerabilities that our organization has, we can do a better job to mitigate them. And that's really what these services are all about. At the very bottom there, I actually give the URL link where you can look at each one of these services specifically and get all the details for any additional questions. Same kind of format that I gave you before. This is what we call our menu service offering. And so it highlights each one of those technical services. It gives you kind of the estimated timeline in order to get set up. It talks to you about what the purpose is and the scope, and then any preparation or any other participants that should be aware of it. And so we'll cover each one of these very quickly for you, so you have some situational awareness of each one of these assessments that we offer. Okay, obviously the first one here is our phishing campaign. And so if you're currently not employing a KnowBe4 or a similar solution, and you just want some visibility on how well are my users or how well do my users react to phishing campaigns, this is a very simple service to get set up for, and Cisa will facilitate that with you. You can see kind of some of the examples of the reports you'll get back, so you can kind of understand, maybe I need to focus my training that when I do with my users more in this area because this was where my highest clicks were. Okay, this one is a very popular service, getting a lot of attention. And this is what we call our CyHy, our Cyber Hygiene Scanning Service. So the idea here is obviously a negotiation between Cisa and you, the organization, They do that through the request paperwork. And what you're doing there is narrowing down the scope, meaning we want you to scan this IP range, we want you to scan this domain. And part of that, within that scanning, once that mechanism is in place, is they'll obviously use their automated tools, Nmap and Nessus typical tools, to kind of scan those top 1,000 ports. Obviously, if they pick any ports and protocols that are vulnerability, they'll give you some awareness of that. They actually will go in depth and do some additional port scanning if that's required based on your environment. But the idea there is to make it continuous. That way you're getting the visibility. A lot of time when you get these reports back, especially out of a Nessus tool, it'll be, a critical or a high. Well, that's just because the CVE is rated on the critical scale, not necessarily because an unsophisticated cyber actor could easily do a exploit against this. And so they try to frame that for you, where although it may be a critical for your organization, it may not be as high. And really that's what it's after. In the next slide, we're going to go ahead and show you kind of what their report card looks like once you are signed up. And so this is the latest version. You can kind of see, and this will come out weekly, and they'll kind of give you the date range of what they do. They will show you the number of hosts that they scanned. They'll show you the number of hosts they found vulnerable, the ports and protocols they identified. They'll do some of the graphic analysis below regarding the severity of some of these threats they have. We'll obviously show you the ports and protocols they scanned. And the idea then is to, again, go ahead and run this again the following week and the following week, so we can kind of work down the list of these high priority vulnerabilities of our environment. The reality is this assessment service is really geared towards the external perimeter of your environment, so anything a threat actor would see from the outside. Okay, this one is a little more detailed. This one's called the remote pen testing service, which you can also sign up to the same kind of process, which is really just a service request, and we'll make sure you get the email address to submit those requests to. On the right side is actually the complete slick sheet for it, but in general, this really includes 3 sub-services that are all kind of part of the remote pen testing kind of area. And that includes the external penetration testing. The idea there is we just did the Sonheim scanning, where now we know what ports and protocols may not be configured correctly. Now they're going to kind of go to that next step. They won't necessarily do anything destructive in nature. They will just prove to you with 100% degree of certainty that if they wanted to run an exploit on this, they absolutely have the ability to do that. Kind of what goes hand in hand with that, and like we see with a lot of incidents that happen, is just not a full awareness on the web application side how things are configured, especially if you're turning this over to another third party. And so part of this service includes that external web application testing, which is obviously a big piece and a big key for a lot of stakeholders. This one also includes the phishing campaign piece. And the reason they do that is because they want to see if they can get their credentials, meaning that they might have found an exploit, but until they did the phishing campaign, they didn't have the credentials or couldn't elevate the credentials in order to do the exploit without the phishing campaign as part of it. And so that's kind of why this one's a little more robust. Obviously, they can do this using a lot of the automated tools, but this is another very popular assessment. Okay, this is our most comprehensive pen test, which we call the RVA, which stands for the Risk and Vulnerability Assessment. And so this one kind of combines a lot of the blocking and tackling that was done in some of the other assessments, and it kind of moves that together. So the first week of the assessment is actually done external, very similar to the Sonheim, very similar to the phishing, very similar to web applications. But anything they gain within that external pen test week, they will use when they come on site. And so that's another thing within this assessment, is it's 1 week external and 1 week on site. And to be transparent, part of that is a team has to be assigned. And obviously there's not, an unlimited number of teams. And so you're kind of competing with the elections infrastructure and some other critical infrastructure sector. So you just got to keep in mind that this one can take almost up to a year in order to get on their list, or more, in order to try to get after this one. But it's the most robust penetration, no cost penetration testing service that we offer at Cisa. Okay, this kind of gives you an insight as part of that remote pen test or that RVA assessment, which includes that penetration and Sonheim kind of activities. So obviously they're going to start with some enumeration and do the vulnerability scan, do some penetration to testing to see what they can get access to. That will include some of that phishing campaign, that social engineering. They'll actually do part of the on-site piece will be the wireless discovery and identification. Obviously the web application that we talked about before will be part of it. Any databases you have out there, whether that's part of web application or in-house. And then any operating system scanning. So if you have a mixed operating system environment, or it mixes between cloud and on-prem, both those two things will be accounted for. But you can kind of see the description and methodology they'll go through in the RVA. Okay, the next one we'll talk about today is what we call, as a fairly new one, what we'll call the critical product evaluation. And so what you can kind of see here is a lot of agencies struggle with new software acquisitions or web applications or anything along those lines, just because we just don't know about this vendor. We just don't know if they are doing due diligence. We don't know if they're going to keep up their product. And so the idea of taking advantage of this one is we kind of take the burden off of you to do that criteria by using this critical product evaluation series. So you can see that they'll look through the software, they'll look for any vulnerabilities in it. It doesn't matter if it's the software or firmware, and they'll take a look at it in deep depth. And so the idea there is to assist you before you make any procurement decisions, just so you get and it's really a non-biased, it's not a vendor, we're not there about poking at a different vendor or not a vendor. It's all about what risk does this system bring to your environment? And do you truly understand what those are before you make that procurement decision? Okay, we also have a malware division within Cisa. And so there's a couple email addresses. And like I said, we'll share the slides with you. But if you're looking for some additional level of clarity on some malware analysis, they have an ability for you to upload malware samples and get some feedback on those. Obviously, they also have the malware reports that we talked about a second ago. And so you can actually look through some of those and see if some of those have already been submitted. But it is a 24/7 dynamic analysis of any malicious code that's analyzed. And the experts will look for that and then get you the findings back. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit more about information sharing. Hopefully some of you are familiar with this. When we talk about TLP, we're talking about a traffic light protocol. And the idea here in the unclassified space is we want to share information. But that doesn't mean we should share all the information. That means that some of the information in here, although maybe not technically classified, still should be protected a different way or have sensitivities on it. And so what we do here is we kind of categorize them from TLP red down to TLP white, with red being the most restrictive. And so the idea there is it's limited to a very specific audience. So sometimes when products come out, like we talked about those advisory, they'll actually be labeled ahead of time as a TLP. And like, let's say, for example, it's a TLP red. So if it's a TLP red and I'm dealing with a manufacturer stakeholder, I can obviously share that with the manufacturer, the defense industrial base manufacturer. However, once he has that, he can't share it with any other third parties. That he has to keep internal, and that's why that TLP red. As we go to amber, they get a little less restrictive, and the end state with this is we share information. We obviously want to get it down to that green or white level so we can openly share it. Just keep in mind that when we do push that information down to that green or white level, obviously the clarity or the detail or the indicators of compromise are not clearly defined, because that's the information that we really want to try to keep protected so that we can get after these adversaries. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about Department of Homeland Security, CISA's automated information sharing. Hopefully some of you have familiarity with this, but we call this our AIS program. And so the idea here is not just about sharing the alerts via some reports or some advisories, but to really kind of do this at the machine-to-machine type level. And so we're going to talk a little bit about this. We won't unfortunately have tons of time to go in depth, but we will give you an overview of the program and how the program works, as well as how to get signed up if you're not currently signed up. Okay, so if you're familiar with the terms taxi and stick, we're going to kind of demystify that for you just a little bit here, but you can kind of understand the flow. And so the idea here is to sign up for these taxi sticks alerts machine to machine. This kind of breaks it down for you so you can kind of see how that process works. And they kind of number them 1 through 4 of kind of how that machine to machine activity type works. The idea is the term STIX is actually an acronym for Structured Threat Information Expression, which is also in the XML program language. So the idea there is that STIX information is the threat information that we're looked at. Each one of these threat information sharing activities can be done at, like I said, machine to machine. And it really only requires you getting signed up for the service in order to be able to take part in it. I know a lot of people are also attracted to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And so these kind of things work hand in hand. A lot of time the MITRE ATT&CK framework threat advisories are also included as part of the taxi sticks information sharing. So if you're not familiar with it, I think I give a link on a following slide where we can kind of get in depth and to make sure that you can get signed up for it as well. Okay, Megan also wanted me to hit some of the current alerts. So yesterday, Cisa, this is kind of a joint alert, issued the Fash Cache alert, as well as the 3 malware reports that came out along with that. And so there's some, kind of takeaways here for this one. And I'll kind of go through them for you or try to break it down for you so we can kind of understand what's really going on here and what's kind of the takeaway with this. So the latest alert, the Fashcash 2.0, is really North Korean related, or we'll call DPRK. It's a subgroup within the North Korean government, kind of the reconnaissance element. Typically we see this associated with APT-38 or the Lazarus Group or Hidden Cobra, but for this one, you can kind of see they named it Beagle Boys. And the idea with that is to identify that group individually, separate from those other groups, based on this financial crime that we're seeing. This group has been attributed to hundreds of millions of dollars, likely stolen. This was part of the ATM heist that was going on. This activity poses significant risk, obviously, to the financial sector. The takeaway here is it erodes our integrity of our financial systems. The Fashcast was really all about their activity related to ATM, hijacking ATMs. The ATM cash out scheme kind of targeted banks or retail systems infrastructure, which we call the switch application or the AIX servers. And this specific alert, as you can see, we published not only the joint alert, but then the 2 malware analysis reports that go along with it. And the idea there, 2 significant develops in this campaign. The first is now we believe the threat actor has the ability to target banks hosting the switch AXI on Windows servers, which was not previous. And then secondly, the expansion of the campaign to target interbank. So the reality is all of our interbanking. And so before it was not quite at that level, and now we're worried about the interbanking piece. So please take time to look at these. In addition to this, they also released the technical alert below, specifically to Hidden Cobra, related to the Fashcash campaign. And so this is kind of the latest one that we've kind of seen hit the street in the last day or so. There's obviously some other ones that have hit, and we'll kind of hit a couple of those real quick on the next slide. So what we're looking at here is, a second ago, I showed you where Cisa keeps all these activity alerts. And so that was underneath the alert activity. I kind of showed you one of the earlier slides where I said, look for Cisa alerts. And so as you can kind of see, as I was talking about earlier, these are numbered. And so obviously AA is the activity alert, the year is 2020, and then they kind of start numbering. And so you can see there's the alert we just talked about, the Fashcash 2.0, which is that North Korean activity. It gives you the good details on there, it tells you the indicators, gives you a good background of that threat group and how they behave. So that way you can be aware of it, especially on the financial sector side. And you can kind of see we go down. The other one I wanted to highlight for you, which should be of interest to you, is about the middle of the page. And that one's the AA20, and it's the 133 alpha. And the reason that one's important is that's a roll-up. And so based on research, based on what's being seen, both at state and local government as well as critical infrastructure, they highlight for you the 10 routinely exploited vulnerabilities. So these are vulnerabilities that either agencies aren't having the awareness of, or they're not sure they have the equipment, or they're not looking at the CVE that goes along with it, the critical vulnerability explanation of that. And so that's why that one's important, is it highlights each one of those top 10s that they see across all sectors so that you can get after it. And so that's a really well done one that I highly encourage you to take advantage and gain some awareness on. Okay, so just like we just talked about, when we start talking about reporting these cyber incidents, obviously the only way that Cisa as well as other federal partners can gain awareness of this is through reporting. And so that's really why we try to encourage the reporting. This lets you not only report yourself, but also see what else has been reporting. And so within that same web page, which we gave you there, the cisa.gov site, they will let you be able to see this. And so a second ago, we talked about the AIS, and you can see down there the little share indicators piece. That's part of how we get signed up for that. On the big Cisa page that I showed you at the very beginning was the big yellow button there to report a cyber issue. But the idea here is for us to help us gain awareness by sharing what you're seeing. And just keep in mind that when you do share at that point in time, as part of the AIS program, we'll anonymize all of the data you send us so that no one will ever know it's your organization, but you can still share the technical information or the indicators of compromise that you're seeing on your network. Okay, well, that was kind of quick and down to dirty. Hopefully we have time for a couple questions, but hopefully I gave you a good overview. So I think I'll hand it back to Megan now for any additional questions.
Awesome, thank you so much, Dave. Yeah, we do have some time for a few questions. So let me just pull one. All right, so obviously about the slides you mentioned, you can make them available, right? So we can share that with them.
Absolutely, yes.
Very awesome. So we will post those on our website once we get them from Dave, typically in a few days, and you will have access to these. Another question is, if I'm interested in one of the cybersecurity assessments that CSAs directly provide, how do I get in contact with Cisa and my local CSA? Should they contact you? Should they contact, through online? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so I had it on one of the slides there, and I think it's called the Cyber Advisor. So the exact address is Cyber Advisor, one word, at hq.dhs.gov. And really, that's kind of our go-to mailbox, our single point mailbox. And then what will happen is they'll look at it and see what region of the country you're in, and then what the nearest local CSA is available, and then let you do direct coordination with them in order to probably take advantage of some of the services we discussed.
Okay. So the people online, if they're in your region, can they reach out directly to you? And
Yes,
if they're not,
yes, absolutely. Yep, for sure.
awesome. Another question, are all the technical vulnerability scanning services no cost as well? And how would I submit a service request?
Yeah, that's a great question. And surprisingly enough, the services are no cost. And you can kind of understand that the idea here I talked about in my beginning slide is it's all about preparedness activities. And that's really why we try to keep this no cost. To be transparent, it's difficult because we have a nationwide request for the ask. And so I just ask you to be a little bit, have some expectation management there as far as the time to get set up. But I know that like the Sci-Hi specifically, they're down to about 3 weeks to get that completed. To answer your question specifically, the address, and I think I had it on one of the slides, but I'll give it to you again. It's vulnerability_info@cisa.dhs.gov. So I'll give that to you one more time. It's vulnerability_info@cisa.dhs.gov. And so the idea there is to go directly with the headquarters vulnerability management team. And at that point in time, they will issue back a service request form. Any of the CSAs also have that service request form. But on the service request form, you'll identify what services you're looking for. And then they'll want some questions answered so they can gain some fidelity about the environment or about the area that you want for the service. And then they'll send you back some paperwork. And really, that's kind of the legal paperwork where you start to scope that idea. And then you kind of make sure they understand this is critical information. This is how it will be protected. And this is, no one will ever be shared the information. And so that way you get some level of assurance that the appropriate protections are in place.
We'll do one more question. If an agency signs up for one of the assessments of scanning services, how is that information protected or secured?
Yeah, so I kind of touched on that a little bit. The Cybersecurity Advisor assessments, the CRR, the EDM, the CIS that I talked about, those ones, the CSA completes what we call PCII, which is Protected Critical Infrastructure Information. And so that then it's released from FOIA, it's released from any legal activities, anything like that. It's in a secure portal, and it stays in a secure portal the entire time. And so we afford those protections. Because the technical services are a little more unique and it's very specific to the agency, the paperwork that I just mentioned, that's where those agreements come into place. And so each agency through the legal department will look at those documents and they'll be very clear on the protections they'll be afforded if they partake in the services. Obviously, we have many, many agencies taking advantage of it, and the idea is to protect the customer. And so we take every precaution we possibly can. So hopefully that gave you a good rundown.
Awesome, thank you so much. All right, well, if anyone has any other questions and you are in this region, feel free to reach out to Dave directly. Again, his information's right there. These slides will be shared. If you were in another region, if you want to reach out to that Cyber Advisor email, like you've mentioned as well, that would probably be the best bet for you.
Great.
But thank you again so much for joining us. We appreciate you.
Well, I appreciate the time, and thank you so much for hanging in there. Hopefully it was beneficial and informative.
Hopefully see you soon in person.
Okay, talk to you soon. Thanks.
Thank you.